Okay, cool. So, all right, let's do it. So, what's the social dilemma? So, we're going to have a conversation about social media and about the documentary Social Dilemma. So, I like what you said, Michael. I think you said it better than I did. Do you want to say that again about what the social dilemma is, so we can start the conversation that way?
Yeah, so one of the people in the film said that the benefits of technology are very close to the downsides. So it's hard to get the benefits without the downsides. So if you go, let's say, to check the weather, then you'll run into some fake news at the same time. So that's kind of the dilemma.
Yeah, they you can't. So, like you said before, like you can't get the good stuff of it without also getting all the bad, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
or it's difficult.
Yeah, and the other way that I framed it was that even though it was, because I think the documentary kind of frames it that way. The way they start with the documentary, it seems that all these people that worked in Silicon Valley, they created with good intentions the whole system of social media, but it seems that it has turned on its head. It's producing bad consequences, even though the intentions were good. So I like your interpretation better of the social dilemma thing, but this is also another thing that certainly that the documentary is trying to expose about the industry. And maybe we can talk about today. We can talk about the some try to figure out if this overall. We kind of touched on this before, but I think we can focus a little bit more on the social media aspect today of technology. If this is good for society, if it's bad for society, in which ways it's good, and in which ways it's bad. So we can try to figure this out. There's a lot to talk about. It's hard to even start.
In my view, uh, uh, we can't have the good without the bad, because you can't just get the top of a coin. It comes with the bottom.
Yeah.
And but that doesn't mean that we can't make rules about how it's used and try to control the bad aspects of it. But there's going to be resistance.
Right. Yep. I agree with that. I mean, uh, one of the one of the first things that I think was done in a wrong way was not to make the the I guess the platforms responsible for the content that they deliver. They should have been treated as broadcasters.
Yeah.
Rather than as just a platform.
Yeah, and one of the things that was pointed out in the documentary is that we created rules for broadcasters regarding how they could advertise to children.
Right.
And none of those rules exist on the internet.
Exactly. And I think the flood of misinformation and fake news results from the fact that you basically gave people the ability to broadcast to millions, just like that, one go. And they can say whatever they want, and there is no regulation of what they can say, and they can't be held liable for any damage they cause. And it starts
up
from
to a certain point. Like if they say something that causes violence, then yes, it's just that threshold is very high.
Yeah,
right?
It's very high. I mean, they're broadcasters. They should go by the same rules that broadcasters are regulated. And I think that would solve a lot of problems. Just making people responsible for the things they say. Yeah.
I agree, but part of the problem with that, and that's actually something that comes up in the documentary. I think everybody kind of agrees on that, but the problem with that particular problem is how do you do that, right? Like, how do you actually do that? Because it's so difficult, you know? And you ask Mark Zuckerberg, and he tries to frame it as a technological problem, you know, and try to give it a technological solution. Oh, we're just going to improve the AI. But as some people point out, both in the documentary and outside of the documentary, you can't do that. You know, it's not a really technology. You can maybe use technology to some extent, but
Mhm.
it's not really something that can be solved really through technology.
Another question is who decides how it must be regulated? Like what information is sufficient, what is insufficient?
Yeah, and in my opinion, it's we're not going to be able to keep the toothpaste from coming out of the tube.
Right.
The best we can do is to figure out how to control the toothpaste. Does that make any sense?
Right. Yeah. In a way.
The toothpaste. You win, David. The toothpaste analogy.
That's
Is
a-
that an original?
uh,
David original?
Yeah,
No,
I'm afraid it is.
That's a very well-known saying. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hadn't heard before, and I thought it was good with the technology analogy. But yeah, awesome. What do you mean by that, David? Exactly.
Who, me?
Well, I don't know. If you want to elaborate, you don't need to. I mean, Raul was. I think he was going to say something.
No, go ahead.
I don't know. I don't know exactly how, but through some form of regulation or rules or something, we have to make it more difficult for people to lie about important things.
Right.
You know, one of the examples given in the documentary is that if two different people begin to type a question on Google, Google has their autocomplete and usually a list of possibilities, and that might be different for two different people. Now, a friend of mine and I did this experiment. He was in another city. We were on the phone, and we sat down at our computers and we typed in, I can't remember what it was, but it was something political. And we each got completely different recommendations and responses on completing the question from Google. And now his contention was that, oh, well, Google just has this algorithm that looks at how do I spend my time on the internet, and they're trying to give me information that matches how I spend my time. Now, that's fine if you're looking for a new storm door or a widget, but it's not fine if you're looking for information about a political point of view. That's how people stay in their silos.
Right.
In my opinion.
Can I? Let me just complicate things just a little bit, because I just watched. It was thanks to Vladimir actually. I think I shared it with you guys, but a little bit late. I think I only shared it today. Vladimir came. Oh, you saw it. So right in the YouTube video, this is a guy who wrote an essay about it, a professor, and from Europe somewhere.
Germany.
And he's basically Germany, and he's criticizing and what he says about truth. He says, so I'm not actually complicating. He complicated it for me. Because he says there's no truth, right? There's no one truth. He's saying, well, that's a fake ideal in the first place. Let's move on. I'm not so sure I agree with that. I'm not so sure I agree.
No.
I think I disagree with that.
Yeah.
I think I disagree with that. But I thought, just to have the German professor be kind of a part of the conversation, since he raises some interesting points. Is there one truth? Is he right when he says, forget about that one truth? There's no one truth. That's just a fake idea.
Sure.
So-
Sure. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So I want to say, I think there's the truth about the facts of a situation, and then there's the truth about the narrative. So it's kind of like a court case, like people interview the witnesses for the facts, and those are supposed to be more like people agree there's one set of facts, but then the lawyers put together the narratives behind the facts. And so that's where I think you can have more than one view on it.
Right. Or yeah, there might not be one truth, but we can tell when something is a blatant lie. Right. And what we're really worried about in social media is not whether it's true or not, but we just want to get rid of the blatant lies, especially malicious blatant lies. And there seems to be no way to stop that, or at least things are not set up to be able to prevent blatant lies, like a pedophile ring based in a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. And how could such a thing be allowed to propagate?
Yeah, I think you both have very good points. Actually, I agree with you both. I think like you're saying, Raul, uh, maybe there's no one truth, but certainly there are lies, right? That's like a blatant lie or fiction. It's not the truth. There simply wasn't a pedophile ring in the basement of that place, right? I mean,
Right.
we know that to be true.
Yeah. I for the most part, I agree. I think that there needs to be some sort of way to prevent people who are saying things that are not true. I guess the problem is, and I'm not playing gotcha here. I'm looking for ideas for something to satisfy myself. Is what does a rule look like that would stop the bad information and allow the good information? What does that rule look like?
Maybe it's similar to the same rule that prevents NBC News from broadcasting, a story like that.
Well,
there is,
yeah, I can understand that, but at the same time, I happen to like Lester Holt, and I was watching the news the day that polio in the wild was eradicated from the entire continent of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And Lester is not just the anchor, he is the managing editor. He decided that was not worth talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was worth talking about. But, that's where Lester and I differ. And so
I think it's,
in other words, it is possible to design or impact people's impression of what is going on in the world by what you choose to leave out as much as by what you choose to put in.
I think it also complicates things when some of those facts are not yet verifiable as well. So not only do you have that problem of who is curating the content, but if someone can just run with the content that we don't even know whether it's true or not yet, a lot of news outlets or people will blow things up before we actually know what's going on, and can kind of twist the perspective on things before we actually know the facts that are out there.
Yeah. I mean, what's that saying? By the time truth is able to get out of bed, the lie has gone around the world twice already, or something like that. It's just much harder to sort of debunk a lie, because first of all, the lies that really spread are the ones that are sensational, that really get people's attention, and truth tends to be boring. You know?
In the documentary, they talk about that. They figured that a false information spreads 6 times faster than a correct one.
Yeah.
That's something they kind of like figured out. So 1 to 6, that's the problem that they're posing, right? By giving us that information, is that the problem is if you have 6 times, or if something is 6 times more effective, like that thing is gonna win, right? In that battle of the fake truth or
Right.
fake news and the right news, the fake news is simply gonna, there's no
Yeah.
chance, 6 times faster, right? So you have to combat that in some way, or else, I mean, the fake news is for sure gonna win that battle.
Right.
But we come to the problem that, I mean, how to solve that problem, that's a lot harder than to identify the problem, right? How to, because it's it doesn't seem like it's something that can ultimately with the technology.
In other words, there's we all want to stop fake bad information that's put up for nefarious or shallow purposes. It doesn't really matter. But there's still a baby in the bathwater. And we don't want to throw that out if we can help it. We want to think of a rule or try to promote a rule or a regulation that stops the bad stuff while still allowing the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that rule or regulation would have to be very vague. I don't know, like it would almost have to be kind of like, slander law or harassment law, where they word it vaguely because it's too hard to put a clear, definition around it. And then the courts would have to decide. Yeah.
I think the best solution is natural selection, like in biology.
Yeah, Vladimir, but right now we have close to natural selection, and fake news is winning out.
Yeah, but it's not going to be for all time, right?
Yes,
For
but,
some artificial selection.
yes,
And for me personally, for example, I don't pay attention to news, so I don't
Good
watch
for you.
anything. And I basically think it's very hard to generalize here, like what's good for all people or for majority of people. Since, like again, I get only this information which I need for my own purposes, and I really cautious about how I spend time on the internet. And I think everybody may be educated in the same way, but it's going to take time. It's not going to happen like overnight. Maybe 10, 20, 50 years, and people realize how to use the internet in the same way. Like, it's not a new technology in terms of social media. When first newspapers came around, it was almost the same thing. Like people used newspapers to manipulate the public opinion, and TV was the same case. And the internet is like just a new stage in this chain.
Sashir, you're at some rally there, some kind of rally, free speech rally.
I am. I've traveled back in time here. I'm coming to you from 1963
That's
at
RFK.
The free speech protest at Berkeley.
You keep getting more impressive, because before you would talk to us from Ireland, from your pub, but now you're actually talking to us from the distant, or not so distant, but the past. So I mean, yeah, it's very interesting.
I've had a lot of time on my hands to, experiment with the space-time continuum. So,
Sashir, since you have figured out one of the great mysteries, which is time travel, let us ask you about a different mystery, which is how do you stop the spreading of misinformation in the 21st century with our online platforms? How do we do that. Have you seen the future and figure out how we did it?
No, I can only go back to the past.
Oh.
Sorry.
I thought he was going to say no, because the world ended because of this.
I think the more
Social
you
media cataclysm.
Maybe that's why he can only go back to the past.
No, actually, it's no spoiler alerts. Sorry.
I think the more you resist it, the more misinformation there will be. So the best way is just not produce misinformation by yourself and try to be as open-minded as you can.
Mhm. Yeah,
General rules, it's like it may be an interesting idea, but again, who decide what kind of rules and what kind of information? What, like, the idea of free speech, I guess, is way more powerful, and people will always argue that, even
Right.
though, like, if I misinform you, if it's some fake news, you may just, produce better news which are going to be true and criticize and,
Yeah. What the thing about this is something that Sasha, what's his name? Baron Cohen said that freedom of speech is not freedom of reach, right? We believe in freedom of speech. Like, for example, you can stand on a fruit, a crate in the park, let's say in Hyde Park, and say whatever you want. And yes, nobody
listens to you.
Nobody can stop you. Nobody is allowed to stop you. But that's not the same as standing in front of a webcam and broadcasting live to millions of people and maybe even inciting violence, like basically what happened in
you can't incite violence from the fruit crate either.
Right. Oh yeah. But to say things that eventually lead to a genocide in Myanmar, for example, is nobody can stop you, right? There's a fine line between saying let's go and kill them and saying I think they don't belong in this country, and I think we should whatever, and so society's conception of what rights are to be accorded to people have is not keeping up with technology, because back then if you said something really outrageous and it wasn't broadcast right away to millions of people, there's enough time for somebody else to say, no, what you're saying is bullshit, and so it doesn't propagate before it is sort of filtered by public opinion and deeper thoughts and things like that, and so that's a big problem.
Well,
Yeah, but again, like education, I mean, if you now have access to all these people, like millions of people, you say, are these people so stupid that they can figure out or distinguish lie from truth? And like people in this case must be responsible for listening to somebody who tells lies and for believing these lies, not like again, genocide or violence. Like if
Right.
these people want to promote violence, they're probably people who want to like do something violent, and we have to think beforehand, like why they really want to do this violence, like what's the reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
Yeah.
if you speak to a broad audience, you have to understand that like people in this audience are mostly responsible for what's going on, not just a person who just express or exaggerate some opinions and wants to other people to do something, like to make them doing something.
Yes, that's true. Even if you say most people have common sense and are reasonable, you just need one crazy person who decides that he's going to that pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. and shoot at the people there.
And we don't even need to talk in hypotheticals, right? Because you were mentioning the Myanmar thing, the Burma episode, and that was I mean that really happened. And how many people died because of that? I mean, a lot of people, right?
Yeah, the Rohingya, the whole community, or not just community, a whole population of were uprooted. A lot of them were killed, raped, forcibly exiled. And
I think you're right that we have to do something to stop that.
yeah,
And I guess my struggle internally in my head is, how do we make a rule that stops that and still allows us to gather here on the internet and have a conversation
right.
rather than in a secret room or attic somewhere?
Yeah,
Well,
I think
yeah.
it's extremely hard, if not impossible. But
It's not impossible.
but I want to yeah, actually let me think through what I was going to say more. You can go ahead, Bruno.
No, I was gonna say that I think that to some extent I do think that it's not possible, like what you guys have said. You know, I agree. You can't have everything, right? You can't have the good without the bad. But I do think it is possible to regulate it a little bit, so it's not quite as raw, so we
Right.
don't get quite these bad results, right? For example, something like Burma, for if you guys don't remember or haven't seen that part of the documentary, it's, and I don't know like the specifics, but basically this led to sort of a small genocide in Burma. They made a campaign on Facebook, using Facebook, leveraging, and Facebook apparently is very popular in Myanmar, Burma. So a lot of people died because of this. And this has already happened in a number of countries, that really bad consequences to a spread of misinformation has occurred. I mean, this has happened in Brazil. Partially, the problem with the coronavirus thing is because there was a lot of misinformation that was spread through Facebook. In the Philippines, you know, some really bad things have happened as well as a result. So like we're seeing this in a bunch of different places. Like it's not just in one, like worldwide, we're seeing like really bad results. Maybe the Burma is like the Myanmar example is the worst so far, but I mean, we've had really bad things happen because there is no control over what you can do. Like what you guys were saying about you can't just spread, you know, hate speech is prohibited for a reason, right? You can't just have someone like incite people to resume the enterprise of National Socialism in Germany without being stopped by the law, being stopped. Like you can't just say whatever you want to say without being stopped. Because free speech cannot be unlimited if you're just going to destroy society in the process, right? So, but we haven't quite figured out how to do that with the online aspect of it. Yeah, so I just think, yeah, I'm talking a lot just to say, you know, we need regulations, we need laws, and that's, you know, that is evident from all these things that I've said. I think the only, reasonable conclusion is that, yeah, we need some laws, we need some regulations, and perhaps putting some of this responsibility in the hands of these companies, I mean, would be the logical place to start.
I haven't seen documentary, but if you're talking about the case with the Rohingya, that wasn't created.
Yes.
By Facebook. That the Rohingya have long been discriminated against in Myanmar. I mean, by the Burmese majority.
Yeah,
It's probably Facebook probably banned, but this wasn't something that was purely created by Facebook.
It wasn't. But
it was weaponized. It was weaponized by Facebook. That's how they organized basically this genocide.
Yeah, there's always been discrimination against the Rohingya, but this actual atrocities, basically a genocide, was very much facilitated through Facebook, through incitement, through Facebook. And the amazing thing to me is that sort of one of the prime movers were Buddhist monks. It's like, wow, you know.
It's
Buddhism
like
is not
adding insult to injury.
Yeah.
right, but this view of Buddhism that many people have, that's this completely non-violent religion, isn't isn't actually true. In the history
Oh,
of
yeah.
Buddhism, there's been plenty of
Sure.
pogroms and internal fights and people killed in the name of
Oh,
Buddhism.
yeah. I mean, the Cambodian empires were Buddhist, but that didn't stop them from doing what they did and waging war against their neighbors and all of that. But what I'm saying is the teachings. Well, yeah, leave it at that.
I do think that a lot of it is complicated by the curation of content, because you see a lot of this happening in other countries like Myanmar, where the language is different and Facebook's ability to have lots of people look through images and separate what is good and what is bad is a lot more difficult because it's in a different language. And I read like a few articles about how Facebook does curate its content, and some of it is automated and has artificial intelligence, but a lot of it for a while, I'm not sure how much is still now, but a lot of it is just people sorting through pictures.
And it's soul destroying. That's what they say.
And it's much easier to have that in the United States or in English-speaking countries, or in countries where there are more common languages or languages that are more commonly spoken. I think also due to the fact that Facebook wasn't even trying to curate its content with respect to things like QAnon for a while,
Mhm.
I think that is also a serious issue. Not only do they need to be curating this content, but we need laws around how do they curate the content, because due to political motivations, they weren't even trying to regulate a whole lot of Republican support, regulate groups like QAnon, because they believed that would lead to less regulation of themselves as a company. So we definitely need to have laws around how you curate content and how you're supposed to curate content in other countries, so that stuff like that doesn't happen.
So I wanted to point out something. I wonder if, so here's kind of a theory, and I don't have proof behind it yet. It's just kind of a guess. But what if humans in general have a certain desire for aggression or sort of crazy behavior? And I wonder if Facebook is kind of just a vehicle for that. But if you try to block it on Facebook, I wonder if they'll just try other means. Like I wonder if we're dealing with like a fundamental fact about human nature. Like when it comes to fake news, like maybe there's just a desire to be rebellious or desire to be outrageous or something. And if you stop it on Facebook, then they'd figure out some other crazy way to do it. I don't know.
And then we'll stop it there, right?
But you can't. They're always.
Well,
yeah.
I do think that
Yeah.
there is an aspect of cultism that is like a little bit like inherent. And yeah, like wanting to rebel and having other people that also believe the same things you do and kind of energize you and create like small social groups who are very like against particular ideas. But Facebook made that a whole lot easier and let that coalesce. I do think that it might happen regardless of the platform, but that there should be laws around that so that no matter what platform comes out, we have
Right.
regulation on that sort of behavior.
But then they'd start groups outside of the internet. Then they'd start secret social groups that do, like they're gonna find you. Yeah, it's like then they'll find a non-technological way to do it. Like they'll just have secret meetings or whatever. However
Yeah,
you try to do.
And
they're gonna-
but
that
but
may
in
be
that-
the case, but
Yeah,
I
but-
think it's important that we don't let them be empowered, basically.
Right.
I mean, just going back to Nazi Germany, Hitler's ideas weren't very popular. There weren't a whole lot of people who supported him. It was just him and a group of other crazy people, essentially. But once those ideas started getting more ground because of oratory skills, because of more training and more doubt in the current system, that's what really allows this sort of ideas to blossom more.
Michael, to what you said about human nature, I think we shouldn't forget that this expression, social animal, it's like we should make stress on the second word. We usually, when we say we are social animals, right, we think about social, but we also need to think about animals. You know, versus,
One of the,
But you know, Michael, what you're saying is true. I kind of like agree with what David said. We gotta stop them, you know, when we can, right? Because these things like snowball, right? So if someone had stopped Hitler in time, you know, we wouldn't have had, you know, concentration camps and 6 million Jews dead, and I don't know, like 50 million people, I think it was, that died in the war. So I mean, that could have been prevented either in Germany or outside of Germany if Winston Churchill, for example, had been in power earlier. So like, but that's just an example. This happens often, right? I mean, like I've been reading a lot about pirates. You know, pirates is a perfect example of, like, if you catch them in the beginning, they weren't really a problem, you know. But when you let just things go, you know, these problems, like at one point, you know, pirates were stopping the whole merchant traffic between, you know, the Americas and Europe, and that's when they decided to stop them, right? And were super powerful.
Yeah.
So this applies to, you know, dangerous people today, you know, and the way, like, this Myanmar example, I mean, shows that this is how they get organized today. You know, Al Qaeda and especially the Caliphate recently, they get organized through social media, right? So you have to stop them. Like when they're using something in a very effective manner, I do think we need to stop them, you know. And yes, they're going to go to the next group afterwards, and you try to stop them there, you know. And but you, at least you're going to try to stop them where they're really big. Like, for example, Facebook, that you can reach 2 billion people, right? That's different from a group where you can reach 200 people or 2,000 people. I mean, it's just a different level, right? So
I mean, scale.
I think that yeah, scale, I think, means
the whole
something.
thing is about scale. If you're saying your nonsense to a group of 200, 2,000 people, that's not the same problem as if you're able to say it instantaneously to millions of people. You know?
No, but it's the same principle.
Yeah, it's the same principle, but you know, we have to, as I said, our ideas about what our rights should be, we don't actually seem to realize that it has to be tailored to the level, the state of technology in society.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I agree that the people who post information, bad information, or wrong information, incorrect information, false information, and the people who spread it need to be stopped. That needs to stop. I completely understand that. I completely agree with that. I guess what I'm thinking about is, let's say, for example, if King George of Great Britain were to make these kinds of rules, would he have construed it as, or would the government of England have construed it as illegal for us to even discuss them, Great Britain banning the United States or the colonies from making their own goods?
Right.
Yes, that under the Declaration of Independence, that was one of the issues. But there's a couple of problems here to look at. is that Nazi Germany is actually not a good example for a lot of what we see today, because there was a central figure that we knew who it was. A lot of stuff that's happening is almost organic. And if you look at it, I think the New Yorker and the New York Times have done some good stuff about like who's in QAnon.
Yeah.
What makes somebody get into QAnon? A lot of these people aren't like right-wing people, like people we'd think the quote MAGA hat wearers. A lot of them are people who are, actually a lot of them were people who are leftist, are people who are, who are considered themselves progressives. And how they got radicalized was they were expressing interest in certain things like even things that like organic farming.
Let me just, I don't want to interrupt you, Sashir, but just to your point, because I did want to bring this like second point, and maybe you can kind of like introduce it. The fact that because of the way YouTube works, and like Netflix even works, like all these media, they have, I mean, we have to talk about this, how the algorithm, like perpetuates these things, right? It creates a loop, right? Because you look at something and usually you wouldn't see anything else, but they will just bring it to your attention. Like exactly what you're saying, you look at some organic farming and all of a sudden, they're bombarding you with QAnon, just
Right.
because there is some sort of connection, right, in their algorithm. So like I just needed to bring that
Right. It becomes a radicalizing program. So if I'm interested in organic farming, suddenly I'm getting things talking about how Monsanto's evil. That next says, well, you might like to see this thing about the secret corporate plan.
Right.
And then it's the secret plan with government, how they're planning to put microchips in you through vaccines. I mean it's an organic, but like QAnon.
And by the way, the earth is flat.
Right. There is no real Q. There's no person. I mean, there's some possibilities about someone who basically created the character. But
It's
just
gaslighting at a scale we've never seen before.
right. Yes.
That's-
It's the same with ISIS. Is
Yeah.
al-Baghdadi. Yes, there was a leader of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, but al-Baghdadi just means of Baghdad. There's
Yeah.
a figure, kind of people figured who was behind al-Baghdadi. But it's not like he made very few public appearances. So it wasn't the same as there's this incredibly charismatic individual. It was basically just an ideological movement. To Michael's point, though, one thing to consider is that humans are tribal by nature. And one thing that I kind of wish Craig was here, because this is something I like talking to Craig about, is that in the 60s, in golden age science fiction, they always like to talk about that Earth becomes united because of things like telecommunication. As soon as, we're talking to Vladimir in Russia, that all of a sudden means that, all the barriers to tribalism are taken down because we start understanding people. That's not exactly true. It just means that I could find maybe somebody in the UK or somebody in Russia who actually agrees with me. And then it becomes a self-reinforcing agreement, even though we're separated by distance.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up one other thing too. So this is just an idea I'm floating out there. I don't have proof behind this, but I think most people are more informed with the internet than without it. There's a few people who are very vulnerable to bad beliefs, and they're the ones that get hit with all the misinformation, and then they keep, reading QAnon articles or whatever. But for most of the people in this group, probably everyone in this group, I would say, we're all more informed with the internet than without it. And if we hear some crazy story, we could debunk it really fast using the internet. So it's these fringe people that cause the danger, and that's what we're concerned with.
Right, but this is the problem. How do we decide
I think the
what
problem
is
is that they persuade enough people that they're not fringe anymore.
Right.
Right, that's the point. So there are people who think we're probably completely bonkers and fringe.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the QAnon story. You hear a lot of stories about people whose families try to tell them, look, Aunt Edna, you're going insane here. And Aunt Edna says, no, you're the ones going insane.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the point, people calling each other sheeple.
Yeah.
Well, somebody could certainly call us sheeple.
I have a simple principle that I think we have to start, or not us, we, the society, and the people who are empowered by society have to even start thinking about It's a simple principle. When bad things will keep on happening as long as the people who cause these bad things are allowed to get away with it. Right? Nobody will, I don't think anyone will argue against that. The thing is, bad things that are happening on the internet, nobody's really, stopping. I mean, they are getting away with it because nobody's really making them take responsibility for or sanctioning them for the things that they cause. And
But like if I create my own website, let's say saying that the moon is made of cheese, right?
yeah,
No one's gonna go on that website, or like you
I
need
gonna
to,
go. I gonna go.
you'll go. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
I don't know.
because
I
I'm
don't know,
not-
Michael.
Like, I feel like
Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. What kind of cheese?
Gruyere.
Gouda cheese.
That's what I
cheddar
heard.
cheese.
Yeah. But it has no holes. Oh, it does. Yeah. But
Yeah, Swiss cheese.
it's just a case of people being allowed to do bad things and getting away with it.
It's
and
still
and the-
hard, but it's still very hard to get away
oh
with.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
if I create my own website saying with some elaborate conspiracy theory that no one's heard of before,
Right.
it's not likely to immediately, like you have to be very good at it. If you're really good at it,
Exactly.
then you do get away with it.
But-
You gotta be
but-
really good at it.
But if your website doesn't have any bad effects, nobody will go after you. But what if your website causes somebody to go to a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. and shoot people there?
But that is illegal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is illegal to incite violence.
Right,
or-
but I don't hear of anyone getting punished for it.
so
Right, but this is the point, though. You can't hold
Yeah.
Q accountable because Q isn't an actual person.
Yeah, but how about the people who allow Q to be propagated?
But
That's
that's millions of people. I mean,
It's-
this is the problem. It's a self-propagating.
you know
thing.
it's and we've not even tried. That's the thing. And we might not be able to stop everything, and nobody has the illusion that you can stop all the bad things from happening, but at least maybe we should try to minimize it.
Where do we
And-
put the controls on that though, so it isn't the case that everyone is being watched all of the time?
Well, how about this? If I know that I say something and somebody gets hurt by it, if I know that there are laws out there that says somebody can sue me, and then maybe I'm not going to be that cavalier about the things I broadcast on the internet. But right now, there's no fear at all.
Well, that's what Dominion Voting Systems is doing. They've sued several
Right.
forced retractions. But is that really the way we want to use our tort system to?
That's what the tort system was designed for, right? So that it's not always the government's job to go after everyone, because the government doesn't have the resources to go after everyone. And the tort system really is just to discourage bad behavior. Not really, there's really no expectation that it would stop it completely. It's just right now there's an imbalance between I think the balance has to be moved somewhere so that people think twice or a lot more before they start spewing off and spreading harmful information. Right now it's just a free-for-all. That's how I feel about it.
Well, there's a couple of problems using the tort system. You look at the case like Napster, where the recording industry did actually try to sue a lot of people.
Right.
They were suing millions of people. And in the end, it didn't really work that well because the courts couldn't handle it.
Mhm.
But if the other issue though is China is actually actively trying to combat this. And they've combated it with, clumsily with the Great Firewall.
Yeah.
But they've also basically
What's-
taking the
what's-
hammer by.
What's that? What? So I don't know what that is, and maybe some of the other people don't. That
Great.
seems interesting. Yeah,
The Great Firewall.
yeah.
That's how they've attempted to wall off the Chinese internet from outside. It's basically they banned Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, a bunch of Instagram. I don't know, a bunch of other social media sites are banned from outside. Social media sites are banned, but they've also basically under the guise of stopping radicalism have taken
Mhm.
hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs and put them into re-education camps.
Right.
But here's the probably the most insidious thing they're doing is why China is taking the lead in AI is they're developing, this is actually something they're doing is they're developing AI to basically patrol social media
Yep.
and to identify people spreading, government stuff or stuff that they say is inciting things. And that's how they can identify people and literally hold them to account.
And they're running a scoreboard, right?
Yes, they have their social media score or their
Every
social credit score.
citizen has
Yeah.
a score as to how, antisocial they are. And when you reach
Wow.
a certain threshold, sanctions start to set in.
Yeah,
Yes.
welcome to Black Mirror. Like,
Yeah.
That does sound Black Mirror, man.
Oh yeah, it is. But this is a real thing. This is
Yeah.
Wow,
Mhm.
that's crazy.
I don't, and I want to say that, so I feel like it's not just the misinformation that causes social media to be harmful, but it's the misinformation combined with the fact that a lot of people who can't,
angry, frustrated, want to.
Yeah.
Right.
a lot of people often who have trouble finding a place in the world, they sort of go to social media as an outlet. So like before social media existed, like if you wanted to, I guess, find a place in the world, you would have to talk to people, get along with people, figure out some way you could be valuable. But I feel like social media has kind of given people this other avenue by which if they feel like they don't have a place in the world, then they can go to this other place. And I feel like it's a combination of that with misinformation that makes it more harmful.
Right.
I think I wanted to bring this up because also we're being a little bit mean to social media here. I want to talk a little bit about the positive aspects as well, which is not nearly as interesting perhaps, but it is true. I really think that social media, there is the potential to build communities, and social media is something that is marvelous. It's what we're doing here, right? We're building a community, and otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do it. So, or it would be different, but certainly wouldn't be like this. We wouldn't be able to have people from all over the world. So that is the good aspect, and we can build, and I think that's what I'm trying to do. That's what you guys are trying to do, build these like positive communities that will bring good benefits to, like from my perspective, like myself and you guys, and like bring good benefits to us all here. And that's, I would say that's a good community, right? But then
Right.
the other side of the coin is like you have bad communities, right? Perhaps those guys, like the QAnon. I've been watching this documentary on HBO about the QAnon. It's very interesting. They explain the QAnon phenomenon to a certain extent. And QAnon right now, and that's another good example of what we were talking about before. QAnon has basically been banned by all the major websites. So it finds itself now in a website, I think it's called 8chan. And 8chan is also the home to a bunch of other communities that are, white supremacists,
Right.
neo-Nazis, misogynistic, all kinds of things. And I'm not saying, because I don't go there, maybe there are some good communities there, but certainly there are some very nefarious communities. So we find ourselves in the situation that the internet has allowed us to build all these great communities and also some bad communities. It depends on really what people want to build, right? It's like a Lego set.
I think nobody tries to build like bad communities. It's like it depends on your perspective. So for those people who even who spread violence, they don't think about themselves that they're bad people. They think,
No.
oh, this is makes sense for us. We do something that we understand, other people don't understand. Probably want to, protest or resist or whatever. But yeah, and from our perspective, it may be like something completely outrageous and negative. But again, like what's good, what's bad, we don't know. I think it's more about evolution. So we just build something good, as you say, other people build something bad, and eventually it's gonna be settled down by the natural process. So we may think about the future in terms of responsibility for producing certain content, but we never know the impacts of our actions. We can't even say that, for example, this community may cause also some dangerous and bad effects in the future. We don't know how, but maybe there's an opportunity. And in the same way, that community which intended to be violent may cause some positive results. So it's kind of tricky. It's never it's not so easy to figure out what leads to what, and if good intentions actually create good causes, or maybe it's going to be otherwise.
Right.
I don't know how to express it better, but for me, like I like to focus mostly on positive things. As you, Bruno, said, like we're building something, we're creating something here, and if there's no social networks, there's no opportunity for us to connect all over the world. And like the question is how we can really create something good, and how we can use the technologies in a proper way for us, not for other people for creating rules, but for us, how we can do that.
I think if I understand what you're saying, and try to add to it a little bit, that the way to control this a little bit it is not always exclusively going to be about regulation and law. Some of it is going to be about persuasion and convincing other people about the right things to do. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. But again, like as for me, for example, I'm gonna give a story from my childhood. I remember I started smoking at the age of 8, and most of people around me were telling me like, you shouldn't smoke, especially adults. You shouldn't smoke. It's bad behavior. It will cause you some problems in the future. And whenever people try to persuade me to quit smoking, I wanted to smoke more and rebel and say, I know what I need to do. I'm responsible for myself, etc. But as soon as they stopped, like as soon as I grew older, I realized that, yeah, it's like when I figure out it on my own, that it's like stupid behavior, that it's something that doesn't lead me anywhere. So I actually quit. So when you try to persuade people to do something good, many people will do something opposite just to say that they're, to prove their own freedom or their own,
there's been studies on this showing that if you try to convince people by showing them scientific evidence, a lot of times they will resist it more. And right now, it's a lot of this is regarding the anti-vax movement. Is that there's certain backlash. People dig in the more you try to show them evidence, and this is where we get this argument about what is information and the fake news, because then they just keep on coming back. Well, that's just fake news. And it's interesting because I've been talking to a lot of people about how it's impossible to disprove a negative.
Right.
So you can just keep on going down this rabbit hole. Like if we tell people, okay, well, this vaccine will stop COVID. And they say, well, how do you know that? because this is what the company did. Here's the phase 3 trial, the trial results. You'd say, well, that's what they want you to know. How do we know they didn't fake the trials? Well, because they had many people, and they said, well, how do you know those people aren't being paid to say that? This is this kind of long rabbit hole.
Yeah, but the context of that is that science is already politicized, not science discipline, but how people view science has already been politicized even before the COVID
Right.
pandemic.
Yeah, science is very politicized, but that's the point, is how do you get around that?
Right.
I think part of it comes from as well the idea that it's healthy to have a certain amount of doubt, to be suspicious of some things, but when that suspicion and doubt leaks to everything, that there's no longer something that you trust in, that society also collectively trusts in.
Right.
You doubt the thing that everyone else believes in.
I
Because
totally
you see
agree.
no reason for it to be false.
I totally agree. But I'm wondering, where do we draw the line and who draws it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is when people talk about the importance of gatekeepers, and it relatively wasn't that long ago that in the U.S. there basically were, as far as TV media was concerned, because the internet didn't exist, there were 3 gatekeepers in terms of the main networks, and then there were the quote papers of record like New York Times or Washington Post or LA Times. But basically, once we start,
do we have a need for some kind of gatekeeper now for the internet, or like more gatekeepers that can play this role?
Well, that's the argument that's one of the arguments that's been out there, is we need gatekeepers.
Right. Well, let me just make one thing clear. When I say that I believe more regulation is really needed, I'm not just thinking in terms of regulation as in stopping content, identifying content and stopping it. I'm talking about a whole framework that incentivizes people to act more responsibly. And the whole thing that's lacking with respect to social media, I think, is just simple old accountability.
It occurs to me, and I don't know if this is a complete picture or not, but it merits consideration, I think, is the idea that social media like Google and Amazon and Facebook, that they should have to pay for their inventory. If their inventory is us, to feed us advertising, they should have to pay us something. I think
that's another issue that I think we should talk about. It's the fact that the model, right, the economic model of the social media platforms is, it seemed nice at first, right, because you're getting a lot of stuff for free, but now it's certainly been revealed that it's not really that free. What they're doing is that they're mining your data, and it's really not free. It's just you don't pay money for it. You pay in some of them actually, but the majority of it is
there was one post that I saw
free,
where somebody had printed out the end user license agreement, or what, the EULA, whatever that is. I always forget.
I read it, David, once you mentioned it. But go on.
Somebody printed out the license agreement for Candy Crush, and it was 23 pages.
Yep.
Right.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a problem. But so in the documentary, someone says, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? And then they elaborate a little bit more. Basically, what's the economic system is that we are sort of in the middle at this point in this economic system. We are not really. We are essentially the product.
We are the product.
We are in the middle. So you have the platforms are really what's producing, right? They're producing their product, which is basically they're mining us. They're mining us, right? And they're selling this. We are not the consumer. The consumer are the companies
The
that are
advertisers.
buying the
Advertising.
advertising. Yeah, they are buying not only our data, but they're also buying the change that is produced in us.
Retention.
Attention.
Because
Yeah.
even though it's a small change, these platforms are changing what we do, what we think, who we are. It's a small change and it's gradual, but it's intentional. It's an intentional change, and that's what they're selling. They're selling data and they're selling change, and there's all these things are being mined from us or are being applied to us. So we are really essentially like the product here, so this is not a very good system for society, arguably. It's because we are the end of the, like, we're taking the damage here, basically.
Now,
I mean,
let me just ask a question. It'll just take a minute. How many of you are on your phone or have your phone with you right now?
I do.
Me, I have my phone right here.
I can't.
unfortunately.
I
All
feel
right.
naked
I
when I don't have
It's
my
nearby and I hate it.
phone with me.
It is
Yeah,
my
I want to
It
throw
is-
it in, I want to throw it out of the window right now, but it's here.
it
I
is
am an
my
exception. I am an exception here.
Good for you.
it is my understanding that with the data that is collected from people's phones and analyzed by an artificial intelligence, that it is likely that an artificial intelligence knows what room you're in your house right now.
Oh yeah, of course.
Well,
Especially if you have GPS enabled. Yeah.
They for sure
that's
know
even.
where you are. I don't know if they know exactly what room
Well-
you're in. but
well,
they
was-
will. If they don't know now, they will in 10 years from now, for sure.
I was communicating this to another person, trying to describe it, and they said, "Yeah, but a real person doesn't know that. It's probably a computer somewhere."
Sure.
And I say, "And that makes you feel better?" It
No,
doesn't me.
If you have GPS enabled on your phone, I think GPS is now accurate to within like a couple of meters.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Oh
It-
yeah.
GPS is a factor, but it's more than that.
Yeah. It's
Well,
also just what they know about people's habits from all the
Yeah.
information. from,
Yeah,
you know.
I guess something that I forgot to say that we're also essentially being mined for is our privacy, right? Our data, but also
Yeah.
our ability to conceal, right?
Our habits are,
Yes, we don't have it's not just the information about us. It's basically we cannot be private, right? Which is
Right.
like it's something
Right.
even more.
Yeah, but in the
extended.
same time, I think everybody may use it. I mean, you say that they, like, but who are they? Like,
Well, in this case, you have the companies and you have
No, but,
you have the social media companies and the people that buy the data, that buy those
Yeah, but,
changes, right?
can you
the
buy the data?
advertising company?
Can you buy the data to do something like to develop this
Well, I don't think
community,
I have
for
the
example?
money.
What?
Well, that's what
Well, I don't
Cambridge
think I have-
Analytica did. They bought the data from Google, was it, or Facebook?
Facebook.
Facebook. And
Yeah, I
then
don't
they,
have the money to do that, Vladimir.
and they used it to try to influence elections.
Yeah, but you don't need
Yeah.
money. It's like, well, you need money, but if you
Yeah.
want to collect data, you may just go on the internet and find the way to do that and to use data to enhance your community, your ideas. I mean, when you say there are a certain group of people who buy the data, who manipulate society. It's like I think it's kind of, it's not true. I think everybody may do that, but it depends like on why you do that and how you do that. I mean,
There's one thing I read that it's not true that everybody who wants to do it can do it because
what?
Okay, somebody who knows more about system, help me out on this if they know this. Like Google has to crawl through all the servers all over the world. And when they crawl through the servers to gather information for their search engine, that is actually a real resource cost on the servers themselves. So they can only allow so many information gathering operations, so many search engines to crawl into their servers. Because if everyone who wants to crawl into a server is allowed to crawl into a server, then the server will not be able to serve.
Well, there's
Right.
denial of service attacks because
Right,
they can't
no.
handle.
Yeah, but
I
I'm just
don't think
talking about normal function of a search engine. That is why Google is monopolies, not just from size, it's actually access to servers all over the world. They have it, and the owners of these servers can't just give it to everyone else, otherwise it'll be too disruptive to their operations.
No, there's limitations on the amount of data they can process. Yes, that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
But
yeah.
in terms of tracking,
I don't necessarily think that it like disables their servers that much. I mean, sure, there's only a certain amount that it can crawl at a time,
Right.
but I mean, there are also limits. Like I am actually familiar with some tools that do
Mhm.
web crawling.
Yeah.
But there are some ways that websites also try to detect whether someone's doing web crawling, like whether you have a certain amount of requests per second
Right.
and like what intervals you're requesting at, that they use to stop people from doing that.
hmm
But for the people who are allowed to crawl and the crawling that is allowed to happen, there's
Yeah.
not
But-
a whole
yeah.
lot of limit on that.
What I'm saying is that there is actually a real limit to how competitive a search engine business can be. There, it's not really. There really are barriers to entry, rather than just
Yeah,
you know.
I understand that. A few years ago, this is maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google at the time,
Yeah.
was in an interview, and he was asked. He had described one of the things that Google does, and it's got a reply out of the interviewer, and he was asked, and he says, "Oh, we don't go over the creepy line. We just get right up next to it." And
Mhm.
and yeah, so I'm wondering who draws that creepy line. Who decides what's creepy and what's not? And I know of an example where, in my opinion, Google clearly crossed the creepy line. They had some sort of app, and they put out a message within the app that this might be useful for your other friends. May we have access to your contacts?
Right.
And once they got access to your contacts, then they were able to crawl through people who never had any association with Google at all. That is definitely creepy
Right.
to me.
well, right. This is the problem because there was a case, and in fact, I had it where U2 had released an album on Apple,
Right.
and everybody who had iTunes got it, whether you liked
Yeah.
it or not. And then they kind of said, okay, well, this is too far because we're forcing people to take this. The problem is, though, a lot of people voluntarily give up the information. And when you talk about tracking people just do it. Like say some of these dating apps where it'll say like whatever you have, like 10 likely matches within a mile of you. Basically, the only reason why it knows that is because people have agreed to that, and the app is just telling people. Or anytime someone just goes on to Facebook or Yelp or whatever and says, like, so and so is checking in at, Top Ramen Restaurant, or Origami Sushi or something. You're at that point, you're voluntarily broadcasting where you are.
Yeah. Oh, I don't have a problem with that. One thing I have a problem is, for example, somebody said that Facebook has a file on you, even if you're not or never ever have been a member of Facebook. They just gather information, and if it somehow belongs to this telephone number, this name, this date of birth, or whatever, they'll lump it together. Then they'll have a file on all your movements in the internet, even if you have never ever joined Facebook. That I think is.
They don't have a file. They have a database that has some information. But when people say a file, it's like I don't know.
Yeah,
it conjures up imagery that I feel like it's
Sure, but there's a file that everything with your telephone number, your address, your everything that's associated with you is, if they can pull it up, right? Somebody can pull it up and say, oh, this person, this, he went to this site, he went to that site, this is what he bought, this is whatever you did.
And
That's
why
what cookies do.
Why do you Zoom with Michael Greenberg every week?
Right, exactly.
Right, but that's what cookies do. A lot of
and it's like that's I don't even know like if I'm like against that or not, but there's a reality to it. The reality is that we're losing our privacy.
Exactly.
And I'm not so sure like if it's a good thing, if it's a bad thing. It's probably not a great thing, but it is certainly something that is real, that is happening, and that we should acknowledge is that, privacy is going away. There is always a company that knows everything about you.
Yeah.
And the government will know everything about you as well, because they can compel these companies to give them the information. So
and facial recognition is starting
but
to get in that as well.
facial recognition. So the Big Brother has really materialized in a different way than we predicted. Fortunately, I mean, the Big Brother of George Orwell was
The government.
and he was like a really mean entity. So we're in a much better position than that for now. But I mean, it's not harmful for us to acknowledge what's going on, and that in fact that has happened in a different way. At least it's good to know about it.
But a lot of people brought up Orwell and have been talking about Orwell in recent years. We don't live in an Orwellian world. We live in an Aldous Huxley world.
True. Yes.
I mean, Aldous Huxley.
And like I said, it's not exactly like Orwell, but I was bringing, and I agree with you, but I was bringing up like the Big Brother element, the fact that we really have no privacy anymore, right? So that's what I was trying to, but I agree with you. Yeah, Brave New World is certainly another thing that has come to fruition in some sense.
Right, but the Huxley world, there's no privacy either. In fact, they think it's weird that people want privacy in the Huxley world. But the reason why nobody has privacy in the Huxley world is because people voluntarily gave it up. They gave it up for convenience, and it was more pleasurable to give up your privacy and your unique identity.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, you're right as well.
So why does this bother us that I guess companies or government know our So we talk about lack of privacy, right? So I guess one thing is hold on, David. So if the government knows everything about us, then they could, spy on people and, I don't know, maybe knock on your door. And is that why we're bothered? Are we bothered because our friends can dig up information? Like why are we bothered about this privacy thing? Is there a main reason or a bunch of little reasons?
There may be a lot of reasons. One thing that occurs to me, and this is a quote from a person who said, not caring about privacy because you have nothing to hide is like not caring about freedom of speech because you have nothing to say.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, I think.
That's a good analogy. Yeah.
Right, but if you look at Brave New World, the end of Brave New Worlds is basically there is this rebellion against the utopia that's created there. And it's basically people just realize that this is ultimately dehumanizing. That to essentially not to essentially cede control of your life over to whatever the system is.
Right.
But you're not. You still have control over your life. You're just feeding information about it to the system.
Well,
right, but once they can start tracking you, then and it's not done as the Orwellian view
right.
of basically enforced by this big brother system and keeping you repressed. It's done because it's just easier. Because
And
you want to
thank
have a good
goodness-
time. Your life
thank-
is easier.
Thank
Yeah.
goodness this conversation doesn't automatically label us all thought criminals.
Yes.
But who cares like what the system labels us? Let's say
Yeah.
we were labeled thought like is it that we're afraid that we can get banned? Is it that we're like what is the fear? Even if we did have
No.
stuff to hide, what is the fear?
This is what I think about that. There's the damage that social media does on a personal level to each of us.
Mhm.
The total, if you total that somehow, all the personal damage that we suffer, it is far outweighed by the damage to society as a whole.
From
I-
privacy. So I'm talking.
Let me give you an example. Let me try to, we don't really, I don't really feel that, for example, Facebook has caused me to suffer maybe in my relationships, or because I'm getting bad deals when I go shopping, or because I got into an accident because of Facebook or anything like that, or I have not been a victim of financial fraud that could be attributable to somebody getting my information. But because of all the information that these social media companies have on us, they are able, or they allow people to tailor our worlds, the information that we receive, right?
So
And
it's
what's the-
that. It's
and-
the fact that they're using it to, I guess,
Because of the
information-
algorithms. Yeah, because they tailor it so that to increase your engagement. And the side effect of that is we have been balkanized, right? We
But
literally
that's kind of
have-
psychological, though, right? That's very
Yeah.
psychological because
Yeah.
it's
No.
saying they're trying to get us addicted, and that I
I-
agree. I think that's the biggest
Yeah,
issue with social media. But remember, that's a psychological issue. That's not.
Actually,
right. No,
some-
not only that, but also our community no longer has a integrated, has a even more shattered view of our realities. You talk to someone from a different part of the country, they have a totally different view. They don't even hear of points of view that Facebook has decided not to feed them because that will reduce their engagement. And what is the result of this sort of balkanization? We don't understand each other that well. We don't have as much empathy for each other anymore. And that's a cost to society that is different from the individual costs that we suffer. That's just my take on that. That's why,
Maybe it's also in defense of privacy that some of the issues or some of what we were talking about earlier, like why should we have people who can have these ideas that are different from the rest of society? I think like those kinds of, like if you think about it, like in terms of, so you have a government, right, who is controlling a lot of this information in terms of like they're trying to catch a criminal or see who would potentially say something that could rouse a lot of people but at what point does that start becoming a bad thing when it's the government who is asserting its own power and control and not letting anyone else threaten the government or take over the government?
You know,
Moving from like US to China, like it would take maybe a few leaders just to overturn that completely from something that is watching everyone to keep everyone safe and turning that into something where you're watching everyone to keep the state in control.
one of the things at
And just to connect my point back here, and like when we have individual privacy that allows us to have these thoughts and allows them to blossom and form, and we can make connections and ideas with other people so that we don't stay under that sort of control.
Well, that's kind of the Orwellian angle, was that Big Brother, yes, he was this big tough figure, but the argument for Big Brother was that he was protecting us. And the end of 1984 is that, yes, I love Big Brother because he's the one keeping us safe.
Well, the example that comes to my mind where it may have gone too far is you guys may remember hearing about the PRISM program. It was a thing that the NSA did to collect telephone data from the telephone companies. That was consistent with a search warrant they received from a FISA court, which is a secret court. And with regard to search warrants, even a judge has to be able to demonstrate probable cause. And my question, I have two questions. One, my mother, she died in 2016, but shortly before she died, this came out. And the NSA was collecting telephone call data from the telephone companies that included everybody, all Americans.
Right.
And so that had to be approved by a FISA court. And so I'm curious as to the logic of the judge who decided that there was probable cause against my mother.
Right.
And even that I could just kind of throw out there in a gray area, except for one thing. When the Congressional Oversight Committee asked the head of the intelligence agency if they collected any phone data on American citizens, he said no. Now, or he said not wittingly, which means yeah. and to me, I agree that we have to have secret things, that we have to have secret entities that conduct espionage and all of that, because it's a harsh world. But I don't agree that those intelligence agencies can lie to the civilian oversight committees. That's too much power, in my opinion.
I agree with that.
So yeah, that's like a specific legal question, I guess. Like, should the judge have allowed it? But I'm still wondering more generally. So we're worried about data privacy because we're afraid that the social media companies use it to manipulate our viewpoint. So they're not using our information to physically hurt us. They're
Well,
using
not only do they control our viewpoints, but they kind of enthrall us to keep us busy, keep all of our attention focused on them. And that attention is meant to be kept there to push us towards buying and consuming more things.
so it's a it's even that it's a psychological attack. It's not a physical attack. We're saying we don't like that you're taking our data because you're using it to create a psychological attack on us.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly legitimate to object to them for doing that.
Hmm.
Except their argument would be they're not attacking us. Their argument would be that yes, they're keeping us online,
Yeah,
but they're trying to help us. It's like the YouTube. If you go onto YouTube or Netflix, then they'd say, well, since you watch this, you might like this.
Yes, sure, but they come on, they know what they're doing at this point. They
Yeah.
know what they're doing. That's
Right,
not
but they don't consider
they know
that
exactly
attack.
what they're doing, man. I mean,
It's-
it's not
right.
It's like they know what they're. These are smart people.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, they know what they're doing. That doesn't
on
mean they
purpose.
themselves believe it's bad. I mean, has anybody used Pandora?
I'm on Pandora.
Right. You
Yeah.
know how Pandora works is you basically
Yeah.
say, if I like the Clash, it will say, well, here's a radio station for people who like the Clash.
Right. But
I don't have any problem with that if you're
Yeah.
talking about musical taste.
right,
I
because
have a problem with that if you're talking about healthcare or government
Right.
programs
Yeah.
or surveillance, you know.
yeah.
So
And Pandora doesn't squeeze in something about fake news, right?
QAnon, a little bit of QAnon
Yeah.
with your
Yeah,
news.
Right, but that
yeah.
but that algorithm Pandora uses is similar to the algorithm that YouTube uses. Facebook.
Oh, sure. Yeah, but it's not the algorithm per se, but how it's used, how it's tweaked. That is a problem.
But by the way, you guys should watch if you have the chance that QAnon documentary on HBO. It's really good, and and there's a whole bunch of people that have made a career out of doing QAnon basically interpretation on YouTube. I mean, the
Right.
world of YouTube is really bizarre. We're kind of like, we don't have a whole lot of time, guys. Can we can do like 15 or 20 minutes?
Sure.
But one thing that the one thing that I think we haven't talked about that I think it's really really a big part of it is how social media changes people's behavior and the way they think, and the way they interact, like how, and not just social media, but that's a big part of it, but like our attachment to our devices like the phone, right, and getting like constant updates on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, and how that's certainly changing things, right? That's certainly changing the way people think and interact and behave. I think it would be a little bit interesting to talk about that a little bit if you guys want.
Yeah, I have one pet theory, and I don't know if it's true or not, and I just use it to kid my kids, and I think the generation that grew up on social media don't have an antenna for irony that is as sensitive as, for example, mine, and I don't know if that's true or not, but it's just.
Why do you think that is?
Because if you're communicating via text, via email, and all those things, it's very hard to convey irony, right? And so I say that's why when they try to revive all these what's his name, the playwright who wrote
Oscar Wilde?
No, more recently, New Yorker. No,
Arthur Miller.
no, he's a comedy playwright. He wrote The Goodbye Girl, and
Yeah.
and
But
Biloxi
Neil Simon?
Blues.
Neil
Neil
Simon.
Simon.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they tried to revive his play in Broadway, it closed after 2 days. And I don't know if my theory holds any water or not, but that's one of my pet theories that something I attribute to social media, to texting and all that. And I wholly admit that I might be totally wrong.
Well, I think there is a coarsening of culture. I think you're right in that sense.
Yeah, that for sure.
We sound like our grandfathers.
I know.
Well, something that is interesting, something that they said in the documentary, I thought that was one of the most interesting things they said, is that we are the last generations to grow up without social media and without the constant use of these devices. So it's interesting because we know, like we like everybody here, we can make
We know there is fake news.
we can understand like the difference between different states of living, right? The next generation will not be able to make that distinction, right? They will not understand how social interactions worked before the constant presence on social media. And I think that idea is a little bit scary. It's certainly an interesting idea, but it's true, right? Like, how will they know,
I kind of agree with that. I've thought about that a lot, and I mentioned that to other people that right now, people know what life, some people at least know what life was without it and with it. But eventually we'll get to a point where no one will be able to really know what it was like before it. So they won't be able to experience it. They can watch it in movies and say, oh, look, this is how people acted before it, but they won't really be able to live or experience it.
And there's a real impact to always be
Yes.
plugged in, like, for example, the teenage girls are like one of the groups that is most at risk for suicide, right now because of the social media impact, it's a very clear like correlation. It's just ridiculous, when it's ridiculous that we are impacted in this way and that we are allowing ourselves to be this vulnerable, but at the same time, and it's not just teenage girls, like everybody, they're a little bit more vulnerable, but everybody is vulnerable to this, and we just can't really get out of it. We might know that it's going on, but we can't really get out of it. Like our our self-esteem, for example, we understand that it's stupid, like that we might, be sad if we don't get enough likes or if someone criticizes on a picture, but it's a very stupid thing, like for a grown-up to be vulnerable, for a teenage girl, okay, it's understandable, but for a grown-up, I mean, a grown man should not have these things, but we do, like we just cannot. I mean, it's kind of like human nature, we cannot escape these traps.
Yeah.
But imagine growing up with that situation. It's different because you can't even understand that the fact that this was not always like this, and those likes become perhaps existential. I don't know. At that point, that's how you perceive yourself, is how your community perceives you and expresses it to you, like in terms of likes.
Well, but
I've already seen close friends who let like 2-year-olds run around all day with an iPad, always perpetually watching YouTube videos.
Maybe we need to really hit rock bottom before the issue is resolved. Sometimes that happens. Like I think that's one of the things is that like with lots of other issues, it becomes a real serious problem to the point where people know it has to change, but social media is more like a very subtle problem.
Yeah.
And so it's like, maybe we'll eventually get to the point where people are so addicted to it that, they like realize something has to change. But I don't know.
No, that's usually the case, Michael. It's only when we hit rock bottom that people do something about it, and DDT and
And frankly, I don't consider storming the Capitol very subtle at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, this gets back to one thing I like to talk about, the fall of civilizations, is that one sign of the fall of civilizations is that they kind of lose focus in terms of what they do. So they end up being more obsessed with essentially things that fragment their society. Like you can
Right.
look at, like the Romans or the Byzantines started getting interested into like the Byzantine Empire actually had like these different essentially kind of gangs based on sport.
Yeah.
They literally had like soccer hooligan gangs that started controlling how Constantinople worked. That actually weakened Constantinople.
Right. That's, yeah.
But is there a
Ouch.
name for that or the period? I've
The,
never heard.
the Reds and the Blacks or something. It's
Right.
with Justinian.
Mhm.
I think that's how he sort of he almost fell. His emperorship almost collapsed because of a riot that occurred at the Colosseum between partisans of this and that. It's the gladiators, or is it?
I think it was like a horse race.
chariots. Yeah.
Right, like
Chariot
at the
races.
Hippodrome.
Yeah, and so.
Which is totally unlike the soccer matches in Europe.
Right, yeah, it's like like I was told you.
I'm gonna say something. I was actually thinking about, and by the way, that's really interesting, and I love history, but I had never heard of that before.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna look it up because that's really interesting.
Okay, I'll recommend a book for you then, Bruno.
Yeah.
It's called Justinian's Flea.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Haven't heard of that, but
And you're absolutely right about the football hooligans in Europe, David. But I was actually thinking about something which is horse racing. People get really into horse racing when it's about the part. Like I've been to Siena, and that's like a city.
Oh, yeah, the Palio. Yeah.
Yeah, the Palio. Well, man, Raul, you know everything. So I've been to Siena, which is a city close to Florence in Tuscany. I had never seen such intense rivalry caused by sports as I've seen like in Siena. Basically, you have the city is divided into four quadrants, and each quadrant has their own team. You know, they have their racers, and it's just absolutely insane. I was like, it's very intimidating actually when you're in there, because it's like, well, now with COVID, I'm sure it's different, but under normal circumstances, you were just like squeezed in between like in the middle of like this huge crowd, and people are just cheering for their horse race, their horses, and they're actually hitting each other as they race. I think that's the only race in the world where they can actually hit each other and hit the other horses. So it's like super dangerous, but the whole thing lasts like 30 seconds. But people, you really like kind of like almost fear for your physical safety, because people get super agitated, and then there are horses falling on top of jockeys, and then people shouting and jumping on top of you. So it's I've never seen such intense rivalry.
Well, in Florence, they used to play this. They still do actually, like once a year. Play this game that was a precursor of rugby and American football and soccer. That basically was teams of 11 on 11. You had to get a ball across, or they'd use like a bladder across a goal. And other than that, there were no other rules.
That's what they still play that in Florence.
Right?
But
Yeah, they still play it, but it's not like it used to be. And that would actually divide, because people would actually die, and they
well, they don't usually die, but they go to the hospital these days.
right now they go to the hospital, but in medieval times, Renaissance times,
Once in a while, a horse would die and I think there are a couple of villages in England that still have this sort of football game where it's in the field between the two villages, and it can range all the way from one village to the other. But yeah, it's bred in circuses, right?
right? Yeah.
But we got sidetracked, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I sidetracked us even more. But yeah, there's so bringing back to the way that technology and social media changes how people interact. I think there's a really pernicious effect to this, that people get. It's so difficult to not be addicted to these things, and and that includes other types of media as well. And that's certainly in my opinion, a negative aspect of this, but it's very hard not to be affected by it.
Right.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, the addiction issue is bigger than the misinformation issue. They're both issues, but I think the addiction issue kind of makes the misinformation issue worse. I feel like that's really the root of it. Yeah.
No, I agree that it's worse. I mean, you look at people today, people used to be, they would interact with each other. But now, I mean, even before COVID, people just look at their phones, unless they don't have a reason to interact while they're in public. I mean, they just look at phones, and at home as well. I mean, people go home and look at their phones, instead of interacting with others. So,
Yeah, and the misinformation makes the addiction easier, right?
Yeah, I guess they feed it's kind of like a chicken and the egg.
Yeah,
which one?
yeah.
I don't know which one starts.
Of course, yeah, they feed into each other, and that's why it's such a big conundrum how to deal with it.
Yeah. But yeah, I like
is there a way that we can change that in terms of like a way that we can navigate this world and fight off this constant addiction, need to be glued to a device? This is a genuine question. I don't know, like, what do you guys think about? Like,
Well,
is there a way?
This is why philosophy is important, and this is, I mean, this is where stuff like knowing epistemology is important.
Right.
Knowing ethics is important. Knowing like Kantian ethics, I mean, or understanding, how basically like rationalism or empiricism, how you understand the world. I think this is a problem, is that people don't, why you can be susceptible to misinformation or fake news, or why you buy into such things as you can't disprove a negative. Is simple that there's a lack of understanding of basic logic coupled with basic ethics.
Is it logic or is it addict? I feel like the internet is kind of just an intuitively addictive thing. Like regardless of your you could be a genius at logic and a genius at philosophy and still be addicted to internet. I feel like to fight like the addiction to internet, like you need a strong awareness of yourself and like an awareness of, like, if you keep watching more and more YouTube videos, like you need that psychological awareness. What's actually going on with me?
Right.
Like, yeah. And I feel like it takes some time to develop that, but yeah.
Well, right. Yeah. But that's again, where, stuff like epistemology becomes important. If you're going to question, if you're going to start, you can create your own reality on the internet. But that's the point, is that you have to be able to question it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a lot of mindlessness.
I agree with what you're saying, Shashir. I talk to some people on a regular basis that if I use the word epistemology, they would look at me like I just stepped out of a Picasso painting. And so I have to ask them, well, how do you know that? What information led you to that conclusion?
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I have to express myself differently.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could take the, a Descartesian point and just say that, well, nothing I see is actually real. And that's actually probably a good argument to take on the internet. So what can I strip it down to? I can strip it down to that I know I'm here and I'm watching it. And then from that point, then you start building up.
Interesting. So philosophy is the key to breaking addiction.
Yes.
Maybe the same holds true with alcohol addiction or drug addiction. I don't know.
Well,
perhaps I'm sure a
it's
certain kind of philosophy is useful
Yeah.
in breaking every kind of addiction.
right. It's maybe a basic sense of self-awareness, of stepping outside of yourself and looking at what's happening to you. And I think a lot of people don't do that.
It's difficult because you have to go against these systems, and again, they know what they're doing, right?
Exactly.
these Netflix people, they're very smart. I mean, well, in fact, it's not just one guy, right? I mean,
Right.
it's a whole department of who God knows how many people that are working on just their only job essentially is to figure out how to keep you hooked.
And then
Do the same thing. So you're going against people that are frankly probably even smarter than you, but you're not
Yeah.
against like one people. One person. You're going against 100 of them. You know, and they spend all their time figuring out how to keep your attention, how to keep you hooked to that one thing. It's hard.
Yeah. And they're not just coders or computer scientists. They're psychologists and neuroscientists and social scientists. And so
Exactly. That's why I'm saying that they're smarter than you, no matter who you
Yeah.
are, because it's a
Yeah.
combination of people, right? That their
right.
whole purpose is to figure this out. And, you know,
Yeah.
certainly they're going to know better than you know, because there's like 100 of them just trying to figure this out.
Right. And
You're
they
having
can
to navigate these waters
Yeah.
without any, we only go with what we have, which is our nature, which doesn't really help because we get addicted to stuff.
right.
While back, maybe it was a couple of years ago, there was an experiment done with machine learning to learn an Atari game. You remember the game Breakout, where
Hmm.
you had a little pong-like paddle, and you would try to get these rectangles to disappear. At any rate, they didn't tell the machine the rules of the game. The only thing they told the computer or machine, the only thing they shared was its score. And they said, do everything you can to improve the score. So they didn't teach the computer how to play. And in a few hours, after several games, many games, I'm sure, the machine mastered every Atari game, every
Right.
single one,
Yeah.
not knowing any rules, just knowing its score. And so that kind of thing is going on now with regard to feeding ads to people. So when we were talking a little earlier about the media controls everything, I agree with that. But when I express that sentiment, I don't use the word control, because to me, maybe not to you guys, but to me, control implies a conscious thought.
Mhm.
And I think it's even worse. There's no consciousness behind it at all.
Yeah.
Oh no, overall the systems to be truly effective should be unconscious actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, David, because I didn't even mention like the AI behind it, right? Which is also much smarter than we are. You know, you have these whole departments of people trying to figure out how to keep you hooked, and you have the AI. So it's a difficult system we're going against if we're trying not to be hooked.
If you give a learning machine the goal of making as much profit for you as possible, analogous to score, it will master this.
Yeah. Just like the computer that beat the best Go player in the world.
Yeah.
They trained it by having two computers play against each other, and they just learned so fast. That's what I read, that it was just the learning curve was just, they zoomed up the learning curve so quickly, and they came up with strategies that nobody has ever conceived of.
Well, there was AlphaGo, and
Yeah.
AlphaGo learned how to play Go by studying millions of games.
Right.
And AlphaGo beat the world champion, I don't know, 8 games out of 10 or something like
Yeah.
that. AlphaGo Zero was not shown any games. AlphaGo Zero played itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And AlphaGo Zero defeated AlphaGo 10 times out of 10.
The machine learning is very good. Yeah. I still think the human will, like, if we can gain an awareness, like when we keep watching the millionth video of like what's going on with ourselves, I think we may be able to beat machine learnings. Like, I think it's just an exercise in self-awareness, and I think we can't, even though machine learning is that brilliant and can, you know, master any game, whatever. I think it can't, at the end of the day, it can't physically force us to do things. And I think if we gain enough of an awareness, I think we can resist it. That's my optimistic theory. But yeah.
That is the less control we give it of actual physical things.
Yeah. As long as it can't physically come and force us to watch it. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Or
but
shut
this-
off the internet, or
Yeah.
shut off the power, shut
Yeah.
off the water.
And as long as there's no one harnessing AI for nefarious purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking, as you say that, I'm just thinking about yes, you're right. We still have that physical degree of control, or that degree of physical control. But I mean, if these things that you know, like stuff like Neuralink and all that stuff, if that stuff really does get developed in the future, imagine having that plugged into your brain. You know,
That
like,
would complicate things. Yeah.
wow.
If we don't discuss this and figure it out while we can,
Right.
it's possible maybe someday we wouldn't be able to.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah. This again keeps on getting back to why philosophy is important, is that if a machine's going to manipulate us, first off, if we have no real sense of self, yeah, that would be fairly easy. If you come down to, again, say, well, I think, therefore I am, and then question everything else, you at least can identify that you exist, but maybe nothing else does.
I think you're right, but we have to teach the younger generations that,
Yeah. We
So-
need to start
because
talking
AI
about it.
is certainly not.
Yeah, and people who say, especially people in the IT field, who say that, oh, you're just exaggerating things, that won't ever happen, and you know, but they can't say that it's for sure will not happen. So we need to think about
Well,
it and start.
I do
And,
think
you know,
it's certainly a failure as well that a lot of these issues aren't discussed directly in computer science. I
Right.
think there
Right.
should be philosophical and ethical, like a part of the curriculum that addresses these kinds of issues, because they are
Right.
important when you can harness or are making something that has that much power.
Yeah, and I think philosophy should be a subject that is taught to all computer science majors, so that they're able to put in context what they're doing. You know, I remember when I first got to graduate school, and you have these mixers of first-year graduate students, and I ended up talking with a computer science PhD students all starting his first year, and he talked about you know, the thing right now is artificial intelligence, and this was in 1987, and saying, you know, and I said, asked him, so artificial intelligence is to try to make computers think like humans? And he said, yeah, something like that. And my question is, why? To what end? Other than, you know, scientific curiosity.
Our demise, probably.
Yeah, yeah, and then still nobody has still answered that question. Why? You know,
Guys, I
you-
don't want to keep you all.
Sure.
Yeah, I
too-
gotta get going.
we always have these conversations that are so interesting that we
Philosophers, that's what we do.
we do some overtime, but I do realize people have constraints.
Yeah.
So do you guys have any like final remarks though? Because I don't want to like just interrupt. If you guys want to say something still. About
Yeah, I'd like to say a few words about, like, just to
Go ahead,
sum up
Vladimir.
my understanding. So in my view, I'm pro artificial intelligence. I really optimistic about what's going to happen in the future, and it's pretty much based on my personal experience. Since I've studied myself for many years, and for me there was a serious issue with addictions and with life in general. And as soon as I started using the computer, the internet, and using it smartly, I figured out basically a lot of things which I couldn't figure out when I just tried to do it on my own. And I like most of the points which were raised in part of the discussion was like, it's kind of, we are losing privacy, we are losing our freedom, and it's a kind of it's kind of bad thing. But for me, it's a good thing. So I don't trust myself. I think that I don't know, not everything, but I don't know a lot of things which got going on in my mind. And computer actually helps me to figure out it better. So if I can get rid of my privacy and kind of delegate all this to the artificial intelligence to govern my behavior, I think it may be also a good thing if I do it with some degree of self-awareness, if I understand it. So when I don't know, like when I'm controlled completely by a phone or by a computer, and when I just see how I degenerate, it's not a good thing. But when I see how it makes me understand better what's going on, understand better myself, in my experience, it's exactly the case. So the more I use it, the more I understand how basically my mind and like the world functions. So if I understand it, it's actually a good thing. And
I think it's a good thing too, and I agree with you. I just feel like there is a downside that is possible that we won't be able to counteract unless we discuss it.
yeah,
I agree with you, David. I mean, that's my position as well.
I have the same view that it's a good thing, and I want to keep it a good thing. There's the amount of information that I'm able to access through the internet is amazing. It's if I'm reading a book and it refers to this concept, I don't need to go search in the library. I just put it through Google, and then it really is, if you use it properly, it really expands your mind. And I want it to remain a good thing. And that's why I have this much concern about social media and its side effects.
I'm actually more of a pessimist. I think I'm not gonna say we're completely doomed, but we're doomed. I think there's too many. It's not. I think the direction we're going is we don't really have a good sense of control of it. I think stuff like why I say, we should study philosophy. It's clear. I don't think there's going to be a mass movement of studying epistemology, ontology, and ethics. I think that's
No, forget about it.
Change is just happening too fast. Hold on. I gotta run, guys. All right, good conversation. Good hosting.
See ya.
Thanks. Cheers.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Any final remarks, or this is it? This is it, right?
Yeah.
That's it for me. Have a good one.
I had a great time, Bruno.
Good seeing all of you. Good chatting. I like this one.
Yeah, I'm glad everybody came. I mean, it was fun. It was a fun
Yeah,
conversation.
thank you guys for
Just let me know
conversation.
when's the next
Also-
meeting.
All right.
I also go